Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Guada, and I'm the supervisor of special education for the Learning and Support Services at our Lancaster County Career and Technology Center. So we are going to talk a little bit today about strengthening partnerships through communication and collaboration, and just look at some of the ways that we at Lancaster County CTC developed processes to meet some of our needs in the area of communication, and how we went through that process of delineating roles and responsibilities and ensuring collaboration to meet all students at the CTC, especially those with diverse needs. So I am going to go through, again, our presenters. Like I said, I work for the IU13, and so we're a little bit unique at the CTC, where the IU13 provides the special education services for the CTC. So I supervise all of the special education services at the Career and Technology Centers. We have 3 campuses in Lancaster County, and then I also support secondary transition programs, so other work immersion programs in Lancaster County, where we focus with students with more intellectual disabilities, autism, more moderate to severe learning disabilities, that prepare them for employment. So maybe they might not have taken the track of career and tech ed, but are on the track for competitive employment. And so we're looking to build and foster those employability skills and independent living skills for those students. So I kind of do it all. But I work very closely with Darla Gettle, who is the supervisor for student services at our Lancaster County Career and Technology Center. And she and I are really the special ed gurus, as we should say, for the CTC. So we're the go-tos for special ed as it relates to the CTC and for the instructors, as well as for our 16 sending districts in Lancaster County. Darla is the liaison for all the special ed administrators at the sending districts that would send to the CTC. So our objectives for today, we're going to share our experience. So that's our first thing, is we have developed some practices that we would like to share, and just kind of talk you through our process on how we worked to improve some practices to help with communication and collaboration. Some of those areas we'll explore today are identifying and clearly defining roles and responsibilities among the staff at the CTC, working on improving collaboration among partners and stakeholders, creating and implementing communication practices to assist in better serving students, and then targeting specific professional development. We identified that was an area that was lacking greatly for our CTE instructors to handle and to best support students with diverse needs. Then the second objective today is to provide you with tools to hopefully assist you in examining your own practices and your own processes, and help you to, possibly see if there could be changes that can be made to better support students. Any questions about what we'll be talking about today? I don't think I have the chat up, so if the host, if you guys see a chat in the chat box, if you can just alert me, that would be fabulous.
Sure, we'll monitor that for you.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay. So what does our CTC look like? I've been at a few of these conferences before, and I've been through a few CTCs around Pennsylvania. And I think ours looks a little different than most of them that I've been to. So I just wanted to explain what that looks like for us. Our CTC is made up of full day and half day programs. Our full day programs are typically for our graduating seniors. We do that, I say typically, because we do sometimes take 11th graders if they're on a different track. For those full day students, our IU13 teachers are the case manager for those students. So we would write the IEPs, facilitate any meetings. We're basically the keeper of that IEP. And then half day students, which are typically our 10th and 11th graders that come in, they do an overarching half-day program in manufacturing or transportation or culinary, to try and get a taste for the different types of programs that are out there. Those are district case managed. So any IEP student that would come to us, the district would be in charge of all of their paperwork, and we would just provide any supports that were necessary while they were at the Career and Technology Center. So our special ed services, what we have going on there is we provide itinerant learning support. So I have 15 itinerant learning support teachers throughout the 3 CTC campuses. And then we have paraeducators that support those itinerant teachers and the students in the programs. We have about 9 of them throughout the 3 CTC campuses. We also have a supervisor, so myself, special education consultants, school psychologist, and social worker at each campus. We provide a resource room type setting with push-in services in the classrooms and then pull-out services to our resource room for any additional services that need to take place. And then for our full-day students who we case manage, we provide direct instruction related to their academic goals, their academic need areas. So if a student is coming to us with a specific learning disability in reading, reading is typically an area that they need to work on. We're really focusing on direct instruction and reading comprehension as it relates to career and tech textbooks and their programming. So we try to work a lot on summarizing and text features and helping them to better access their content that they're going to be learning in their program. And then we also support the CTE programming through any SDIs and content reinforcement. So anything that we would need to help to them to grasp a certain concept or just provide support in the career and technology classroom. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about our why, the purpose for why we started this. And I'm going to be very candid with you. We had a few situations where some stakeholders, whether they be district staff, special ed staff, CTC instructors, or my learning support teachers, we're not always communicating well. And there had been some, I don't want to say complaints, but some information that was passed on, feedback that was passed on to us that we could improve certain things. And so we said, from those few little areas that we looked at, we said, okay, well, let's see if this is a bigger picture than what we actually imagined. So we ended up looking internally at our own staff and sending out surveys to our district staff to get some feedback and say, is this an overarching thought amongst the group, or is it just certain individuals that were not feeling like they were in the loop with everything? Through those processes, through the surveys that we sent out and the information that we gathered, we did see that there was some areas of need. And we had to look at, first of all, improving our communication, which was huge. And I know with 16 sending districts, with the IU running special education, with CTC trying to provide the CTE programming, it can get a little confusing. And if you're not communicating clearly and often, then things get mixed up. And there's misunderstandings and misconceptions. And that's where we wanted to try and look at minimizing. So that was our main purpose for this. It was just leadership team, myself, Darla, our director at the CTC and assistant director, my director at the IU13, just getting together and saying, what could we do differently? How can we do it better in order to make sure that our stakeholders are happy, but ultimately that we're best serving our students. And that's what we needed to look at.
I do have one question that came in the chat.
Sure.
Do students who need supplemental not accepted?
So that's a good question. So we accept all students. Typically when they transition to the Career and Technology Center, we do transition to a learning itinerant model. So if a student needs more than itinerant support, they are of course not denied that support. We just add those additional supports afterwards. So we may be looking at adjusting our model design to include some of that. But right now, what we do is they transition to an itinerant model, and they receive additional supports as needed. So we write it into the IEP. So what we did first is we had, like I said, we had to take a look and look internally at our current processes, reach out to partners. We wanted to gather as much evidence as possible to support whatever the outcomes of the surveys were. Our first big step that we needed to do was make sure that the leadership was ready to change. So our administrators at each of our campuses, they are the spokesperson for their staff. And if they were not, as you all probably know, if an administrator is not quite ready or not quite feeling the change, it may take a bit longer to get the whole team there. So we want to make sure they were on board first with any changes that needed to take place. And then we really worked to brainstorm practical ideas. So what are some ways that we can move forward realistically? What are the steps that we can take? And then how do we move forward from that situation? So as we were brainstorming and coming up with some of those ideas, we worked on goal setting. So we wanted to make sure we were choosing achievable yet measurable goals. We wanted to limit the amount of goals that we were working on, because if we try and work on too much at one time, we would not be able to do it with quality. We wanted the goals to be broad but specific, and I know that's kind of an oxymoron, but you'll see as we look at the goals, they are fairly general, but we do kind of narrow them down a little bit. So the goals that we ended up choosing based on our data were to achieve greater communication among all stakeholder groups. So you can see improving communication is, to me, a very broad improvement area. So we looked at that, and then we broke that down into steps. Provide targeted professional development for CTC lab instructors regarding the needs of diverse learners. And then our last one is to develop a support structure to bridge the work of the CTC and intermediate unit staff. And we thought those three, even if we narrow them down a little bit and had more goals within each of them, those three would be meeting all of the needs that were addressed in any of the surveys that we sent out and any of the areas that we identified as needs for us. So our first area was improving communication, and we said we're going to start with that. Our biggest step there was to identify a point of contact. So as you can imagine, with 15 learning and support teachers, 9 paraeducators, various CTC instructors at each building, administrators, everybody else, if they are all communicating with districts or all communicating with one another, it can be very muddy. So we identified Darla as our point of contact with district administrators. So she would be the person that would communicate to those special education administrators regarding the processes. And if we had questions, we would go to Darla with some of those things so we can get them answered. We had regular meetings, the CTC and the IU13 together. So Darla and I had regular meetings, and then as well as our administrative team. We conducted secondary education administration meetings where it was all of the principals included in that, the directors, the assistant directors, and the IU13, in order to make sure that we're all on the same page. We had regular meetings with the IU13 and special education administrators as well at the district level. And the whole goal of this, the whole goal of having the meetings, was to really make sure that we were putting it out there that we are on the same team, that it's not the IU and we're going to go to the IU, or it's not CTC and it's the CTC's problem. We really wanted to come at it from a united front, and that we're on the same team and we're working together, and make sure that all parties felt that. And that was something that was missing for many years. And I think just making sure that we established that tone and came at it from a positive angle that people started to feel that was more of a team effort. We focused on being proactive in our communication and making sure that we had opportunities to problem solve together. For the communication piece for the CTC instructors, we made sure that IU13 was present at faculty meetings, which in the past had not always been the case. So our IU13 teachers and paraeducators and support team were present at those faculty meetings, and then also provided some type of, I don't want to say professional development, but just a few tidbits to the staff related to certain strategies for working with students. So for instance, if we had students that had autism and we were working with certain areas with that student with communication and with social skills, or just maybe how would you respond to a student with autism in this situation, we would provide little tips like that in the beginnings or ends of those faculty meetings to kind of give that opportunity to communicate with the instructors who don't typically work with those types of students, provide them with as much background as we could, and give them an opportunity to ask questions and problem solve together in that environment. We often had CTC instructors teaming up with the special education teachers to provide some information on what went well in their classroom. So what were some things that were going well, and sharing that with other instructors in the faculty meetings. And that led to, other teachers, I think, taking that step outside of their comfort zone and maybe trying something new and different with their learning support teachers. So not just in the faculty meetings did we provide professional development to the CTC instructors. We really looked at working with our curriculum and development director, who provides or who sets the stage for professional development. He plans all of the days that we have and plans the topics. So we identified certain areas just through observations that the staff had, experiences that we've all been through, and then any input that we received. And we provide very pointed professional development in those areas. So in working with some of the staff, we identified that universal design for learning was an area that we wanted to focus on in some of the professional development days. We identified that we needed de-escalation techniques because we had some students that had some more intense needs related to behavior, and identifying how to de-escalate a student who is emotionally charged at that moment. How do we work with some of the students that have the emotional disturbances that are in more of an acting out behavior? So we've identified various different areas that we wanted to work on with staff, identified time that was going to fit. Thankfully, right after this, we looked at our calendar and were able to pull days that we had many student days, and we could pull from student days and really add in some more professional development time, which was great for the instructors to be able to have some extra time for PD, which isn't always in our ability to do with contracts and everything. This was really neat that they were able to add in at least 2 additional professional development days each year so far. So that has been good. We wanted to really challenge methods that were previously occurring. So as you all know, especially for those of us who've been in education for a long time, we have a way of doing things, and if it was working, it was working. It was what we were comfortable with. So sometimes we didn't always see that it wasn't working as well as it could have been working. And ultimately, change is hard. Change is hard for anybody, but especially our veteran teachers who most of our CTC instructors have not come from an area of education. They're coming from industry. So they haven't had as many of the tools to prepare them best for working with some of these students. And they knew how it was when they went to school and how they dealt with things when they started. And so we really wanted to be pointed in providing an opportunity for us to say, we're going to challenge you with making some of these changes, knowing that it's going to be difficult for people to change, knowing that we're going to need to provide support. And that's what we did. We made sure that my support team, myself, our learning support teachers were there to support the instructors as they were going through some of the various different changes in how they should provide instruction for diverse learners, or react to certain things that are happening in the classroom, and or how we engage the students the best way. So all of those areas, again, was just making sure that we weren't stuck in a rut. We weren't continuing on the same path, that everybody was understanding that this might take us down a new road. And then, as you know, we can't just share the information and say, here's how you're going to do it. We need to actually have them put it to practical application. So a lot of our professional development days were mornings where we would provide the content and get them really engrossed in the content. And then afternoons where we would work in small groups to make it practical. How do we, okay, if we have this area of universal design for learning, how do we then take this lesson that we developed for, reading a micrometer, and be able to identify some of these areas that we could improve upon using some of these strategies we just learned related to universal design. So we took that time, and that's what it really needed. We needed the time to kind of sit there and work through it in small groups that were varied. So some administrators in the group, some special education teachers in the group, some CTC instructors in the group, a mixture of various different people coming from different lenses, able to say, okay, how do we then move forward in our everyday lessons and demonstrations and activities that we're going to be providing to students. So lastly, our third thing that we identified was developing a support structure. And through that, we identified roles and responsibilities. So as our leadership team, as I mentioned before, Darla, myself, our directors at the CTC and our directors at the IU really worked together to look at the various roles within our CTC. And then clearly defined responsibilities for each member, so for each role. And that was the way we were going to communicate what their responsibilities were and have that collaboration. So we did come up with a chart, which I believe was in your handouts, but I will show up here in a moment. But the chart we shared at faculty meetings, and we explained each of the components of the faculty meetings. We took questions, we asked for input, and then we worked to make sure that that was what was happening in practice. We made sure to increase timely and consistent communications all aboard, and that hopefully would then improve staff morale and the collaboration. So I'm going to quickly switch over to that handout so that you can see it, and let me drag it onto the screen so that you can see it a little bit better. Can everybody see that? Maybe give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay. So this is the chart that we did, and on the side, basically we identified, we're not saying that these are only responsibilities that you may have in this area, but these are some of the areas where we saw the waters muddy a bit. And we wanted to make sure that those three entities, the special educator, the CTC instructor, and the paraprofessional, we're all working together for a common goal. But there are some roles that are obviously more of a special educator role than a paraprofessional role, or than a CTC instructor role, and vice versa. So we wanted to make sure that we were very clear with that in identifying it. We broke it down into various different areas. So instruction was our first one, assessment, communication, leadership, and record keeping. Those were the areas that we identified as needing a clear delineation amongst, and we identified what each person does. Some of the areas were similar. So for instance, and I want to find one that was similar here. So hold on one second. Okay, so down here in assessment, adapts classroom assessments with collaboration with CTC instructor. And over here under the instructor column, it said adapts classroom assessments in conjunction with special educator. So both of those roles are responsible for the adapting classroom assessments. We're asking that both the special educator and the CTC instructor work in collaboration in order to adapt any classroom assessments that need to occur. Obviously, the special educator will come from it from a lens of here's what the student needs, here's how we could break it down, and the CTC instructor obviously has the content and knows what needs to be assessed. So we're looking at method for assessment, how to assess, and then what actually needs to be assessed. But together, then we can adapt a classroom assessment to make it for us to be able to support that student as best we can. I won't go through all of these because you have the handout for you. I'll just identify a few areas in each of the contents here. So for instruction, we looked at between the special educator and the paraprofessional, some of the areas that kind of got muddied were who was providing direct instruction. So we knew that the special educator was the only one that should be providing direct instruction related to students' IEP goals. The paraprofessional would be ones that might be reteaching or providing information that was either already taught in the CTE classroom or already taught by the special education teacher, following any instructional plans as implemented by the instructor and or special ed teacher, but not actually providing the instruction. As it comes to accommodations, we want the special education teacher is responsible for designing the accommodations and modifications. The instructor is responsible for modifying instruction and implementing accommodations and modifications. And then the paraprofessional can also implement those modifications and accommodations, but are not necessarily in charge of designing them. So that's kind of where we identify the different roles. When we went down to communication, this is one where we wanted to make sure that everybody was being proactive and communicating and collaborating together. Problem-solving meetings were something that occurred often. So if they're not meeting with their instructor at the end of the day, or possibly every other day or twice a week, that's typically what's occurring. And in those situations, we are having those pointed conversations about specific students and their needs and how we can best support them. Those are something that both the educator, the special educator, and the CTC instructor would do together. Paraprofessional may not take a role in that, but may provide feedback as it relates to any type of accommodations that they're providing, any success the students might be having in certain areas. Collaboration is a big piece in this as well. Collaborating with special educator to differentiate curriculum, providing proactive and timely communication. Again, that's something that everybody in the area would do. Participate in professional development relating to inclusive practices. Again, something that both special educator and CTC instructor would be doing. Moving down to leadership. Again, if you see the very first bullet under leadership, each of the roles will take a point in creating a positive environment, a positive and reinforcing environment. So that was one of the focuses that we worked on with professional development as well, which was that culture, that positive, that school climate piece. And all parties have a role in making sure that that's being reinforced throughout our work with students. Again, modeling effective communication for other staff Again, it's in all columns because we felt like that was something that everybody should be doing based off of the professional development we provided. When you get down to specifics, training and supervising paraeducators, that was the job of the special education teacher. Facilitating use of related services professionals, so any speech or OT or PT that would come into the building, so any type of that would really fall under the responsibility of the special educator. Making sure that there's structure in the classroom, dealing with classroom management, that would fall on the career and technology teacher because they're the one that is in the classroom all of the time. And then record keeping was the last one. And this was an area just to make sure that we were documenting what needed to be documented and maintaining any logs that we needed to maintain. We list out logs for any direct service we provide to students. So maintaining records of accommodations or modifications really falls under the career and tech teacher as well as the special educator, and actually the paraprofessional as well, because they also maintain logs for their area and timesheets that they have. You'll see mainly in these columns, paraprofessional is assisting the teachers in documentation. So the others are actually responsible for documentation. If it comes back to them, it's going to come back to the teacher. So it's not going to necessarily come back to the paraeducator. So we wanted to make sure that they knew what they were responsible for with that. So what did this chart do for us? I'm going to be honest in saying that just being able to have a clear outline for what the expectation was for each of those areas was huge for a lot of staff, because it does get confusing who's doing what, and for someone to say this is very clearly what I'm supposed to do. Now, of course, it doesn't encompass every responsibility that they have as teachers. As we know, there's a whole lot more than that, but this was some of the areas that we needed to look at based on the needs that we were seeing within our programs. We would go back and refer to the chart. So if there were questions, we made sure that we went back, we referred to the chart, we reviewed it often. So when we first rolled it out about 2 years, a year and a half ago, I guess, we went to the faculty meetings for the first few months, and we maybe took each section at a time. So we started with instruction and we really dove into instruction and what do the roles look like in instruction, and then maybe we moved down to assessment and went on to each of the areas in a different faculty meeting. And that was just like maybe taking 15 to 20 minutes to go through a certain area and review it, just so that they were made aware of what was occurring, and what changes we were expecting, and what that should look like for them. And then we related it back to everyday questions that they may have. So they would come up and they would say, okay, so I have this scenario, or I have this situation. How would we go about doing it? Who would do what? How do we make that work as a team? And we would then help talk through those situations. So that was the roles and responsibilities chart that we developed. Then we wanted to make sure that there was ongoing practice. This isn't something that we just said, okay, we're going to start this and we're going to improve communication. We're going to make sure you have the training and tools you need through professional development, and we're going to make you collaborate as instructors and understanding what your roles are in that. We actually have to continue to change this as the years go on. So I've already looked at this chart and made changes for next year related to some of the things that we've implemented. We implemented new service logs where we're providing input on the service, the type of service we're providing, how much service we're providing, the time it takes, who's providing the actual service. Some of that needs to be implemented as well and part of documentation. And there's always something that is going to be changing, especially when you're working with special education. So our practices always have to change and evolve. So I think that this looking internally at processes and practices isn't something that we've done once and we said, okay, I think we're good. Let's move forward. We're going to have to continue to do that as an organization to be able to provide the best support for students. We need to make sure that we are committed to that culture of collaboration. So it very often, I think it gets, oh, I have to do this and I'm responsible for this and I have to make sure I do this, rather than looking and saying, okay, what can we do together? And making sure it's not separate, that it can be a collaboration and we are working together. The last thing is just identifying that common goal. So we're all here to best meet the needs of our students. Those students are ever changing. They are continuing to become more diverse. And being able to make that change. As the person who put in the chat before about supplemental services, we looked at that and we've currently been gathering the data on service logs and how much time a student is needing for the special education services. And there are a lot of students that are receiving supplemental support, even in an itinerant model, based off of the service logs that we have and the data that we've collected this year. Prior to this year, we didn't have a tool to collect that data. Our tool was antiquated. So we developed a new tool this year, and we've been using a new tool for that piece, which has helped us to gather the data that we need in order to make informed decisions regarding service design and what that looks like. But that's something that if you asked me, a few years ago and then asked me now, my answer would have been totally different. So knowing that we're continuing to get students that require more intense supports, that require different supports than what we may have offered in the past, we have to be able to meet those needs, and we have to be able to change what we're doing and look internally to move things around and adjust to make sure that those students are best supported in our environment. I do have a quote here that I thought was great for this, is if you want to change, you have to make it. If we want progress, then we have to drive it. And that's something that I think is definitely a great quote for this type of situation, because initially, it was about making that change and taking that next step. But in order to continue to make progress, you have to be able to be that driving force. And that's something that's going to take collaboration, and it's going to take you working together and moving forward in that same goal mindset, which is what we're looking for. I went a little fast there, so I want to go back to any specific questions that you guys might have related to our design, our format, how we developed any of the roles and responsibilities, how we identified our goals, or any questions that you may have related to those. I don't know if there was any in the chat.
A lot of great feedback on the roles and responsibilities chart. They seem to like that. One person asked if you'd be willing to share it in an editable format.
Okay, yeah, I can look into making it editable and looking at that. Yes.
Okay. I also have questions on the PowerPoint as well, and I know we didn't get that. Would you be able to send us the PowerPoint so we can send it out to the participants?
Yes, I did tell Patty I would send it at the end because I didn't quite have it ready to go.
That's wonderful. We'll make sure everybody gets a copy of that as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. I did see the question, what were your biggest challenges with implementing these changes? And I'm going to be very honest with you, Rachel, there were a ton of challenges to start. Again, some of those were just, we have a bunch of people that are set in their ways. And that was a huge piece in being able to say, well, this is how I've always done it, and this is how I want to continue to do it. And then being able to kind of help finesse and move them to a point where they were comfortable with making some changes. And then it was just making sure everybody had I don't want to say time, but time is always an issue. And if we wanted to be in that spirit of collaboration and that spirit of we're in this together, same team, we really needed to make time for one another in order to have those meetings, those side meetings. So those times where we just met with administration and kind of said, okay, here's where we are. Let's get everybody on board. And we've had hiccups. So I've, I can share one hiccup that we had recently, which was, we come from different backgrounds. We don't always agree. So I come from a special education background. This is my 22nd year in education. And I started off as a emotional support teacher. And so emotional support has been my grounding force as far as trying to provide as much advocacy as I can for students with emotional needs, coming to the CTC and being able to participate in current tech ed in that environment, even though some of them may have more needs than what a typical student at the Career Technology Center would come in with. And so that has been my area of one area where I've been advocating hard, and I tend to get a little bit of pushback. And so it is just getting us on the same page and saying what's best for students. What does that look like, as far as making sure that the CTC and the IU feel like they're supporting one another. So I'm there really to support students, but I'm also there to support those instructors. And I'm also there to support the administration at the CTC. And I'm also there to be the liaison with those 16 sending districts to support them and their transition services to students. And so you can kind of feel pulled in many different directions at times. And so that's one where you really just have to focus on that common goal. We're all there for a reason, and having those consistent opportunities to talk through anything that might come up, have those meetings and be very clear with here's where we are, getting everybody back to that, okay, we all want the same thing. How are we going to get there with the least amount of upset feelings? So I can't say that it's been perfect, and it hasn't been perfect, but I really feel like these tools have helped, and making sure that we take that time to provide the staff with training, because that's really where the fear is grounded in. They don't have the experience, they haven't had to do it, and so they're not sure of it. And if you give them the training and you give them that time for application of the skill that you just taught them, or of the strategy you just taught them, or whatever, they're going to feel more confident, and they're going to be more willing to make that change. So those are just some of the barriers that I've encountered with doing this. I do feel like it's been incredibly well worth it, though, in the long run, even despite all of the challenges, because even our challenges get us to a place where we're collaborating because we're problem solving together. So. You're welcome, Rachel. What other questions do you have related to this topic? Okay. Well, I did end a little bit early, so I apologize for that with the timing of the next session.
No problem.
But if you do have any questions, my contact information is here, as well as Darla's. We'd be happy to talk you through anything, or any comments, or maybe a few of you need to reach out and help me with how you do supplemental support as well. We've been trying really quickly to look at the itinerant support, and without having every special education teacher learning all of the programs, it's been a little frustrating to try and logistically figure everything out. But we're open to any feedback that other CTCs have as well.